Welcome to Age of AI, Politics, Law, and Society, hosted by Medlir Mema, Chris Lamont, and Young Diogenes, in association with the Global Governance Institute in Brussels.
Welcome. In previous episodes, we have discussed the impact that algorithmic bias plays both in international relations as well as in today's workplace, from hiring decisions to educational outcomes. Today, we turn our attention to a field that's increasingly influenced by emerging technologies, architecture and urban planning. As AI begins to shape architectural design and public policy decision-making, we'll explore the risks of perpetuating discrimination through biased algorithms, the potential for job displacement, and the over-reliance on technology that might diminish human creativity and expertise. To talk to us about these issues and more, I have the pleasure of welcoming today in our program, Iva Mema. Iva, welcome to Age of AI.
Thank you so much for having me, Medlir.
Well, it's great to have you here. And actually, before we get into the heart of the subject, which may be a little bit foreign perhaps for our listeners, first, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you guys started thinking about AI and architecture.
Absolutely. So a little bit about myself is I actually went to the University of Waterloo School of Architecture in Canada, where I got my master's in architecture. I explored regenerative ecosystems that react to current climate impacts and urban cities and how they can work with climate and a response to climate rather than just building architecture that doesn't interact or help our planet grow. I work as a full-time architect where we specialize in high-rise residential building, but as well as really exciting organic commercial buildings as well. Some of our clients are Cineplex, so it's very exciting to work with those projects. When thinking about architecture and AI, being so young in the field, you really see how the technology and the direction of design is going. I think it's important to tackle and begin at the beginning stages of my career on that front because it's going to excel my career in the future. I know people have been talking about the risks of AI in architecture, but we also talk about how the digital technologies have changed from graphite to computer to now AI driven. So trying to find the conflict between those feelings is really exciting.
Well, it seems that there's a parallel there. I mean, we talk about Age of AI being the fourth industrial revolution after the third industrial revolution, which is more computer and internet-based, and now we're into this Age of AI. Now, you mentioned there that one of the projects you're working on, this idea of regenerative cities and your research on mangrove city. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So mangrove city is more a passion of mine where I study regenerative land. It would be cool if it existed one day. I worked on designing a floating island that actually reacts to climate impact on the specific island in Vanuatu. So it's in the oceanic region and kind of having architecture that grows. So I did a lot of research on coral accretion, which is a chemical reaction that salt and a slow current have to create that calcifies and it creates fake coral, which is a super important thing that's needed in our oceans now because that provides a lot of habitat. And they actually work with mangroves, and mangrove roots actually help clean water. So it's kind of creating an ecosystem underwater that allows people to live, but also creating a resilient foundation during storms, typhoons, when something were to happen. It still creates a sturdy environment for people to live while also enjoying where they're living. Something that was important in my research was the social impact that climate change is having in third world countries, when unfortunately they aren't the biggest cause of the impact that's being implicated on the planet. So mending their relationship with the ocean was very important in the thesis to drive the story because it's part of their spirituality. So having that tension with land and water was a very interesting relationship to try to solve architecturally.
Yeah. So I'm getting some Avatar feels in here. It's like there's a bit of a sense of this, I can imagine this organic kind of architecture, right? And cities and areas building coming out of the water in a way. And so that's beautiful. And thank you for painting that image actually for us. But I think you kind of like, and I'm happy we started the conversation here because oftentimes, especially in the context of this podcast, if we talk about AI and architecture, we're saying, what does this have to do with international law and society and politics? And I think you just underlined the rationale in a way for this conversation, which is that whenever we talk about architecture, it's never really just about architecture, right? Whenever we talk about buildings, it's never really just about buildings. It's about public policy and social policy. In fact, architecture and urban planning have long been shaped by social and political agendas. I know there are various narratives here, various stories, but one telling, for example, one infamous example of is Robert Moses ordering engineers to build the New York City's Southern State Parkway's bridges extra low to prevent poor people in buses from using the highway. And it seems that these kinds of design choices show that actually architecture and urban planning is never just about buildings and roads, but it's also about power and control. And so how do you see, coming back down to the topic of AI, how do you see emerging technologies and AI in particular reinforcing or potentially challenging these kinds of practices in urban planning and design today? How can AI contribute to the creation of fairer and more human-centric cities and societies? And maybe nature-centric cities and societies, because again, the mangrove example perhaps points to that. But how can AI help us make sure move away from these discriminatory practices?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think something with AI that's very important is it's data collected within a city. It's not something that you can choose to manipulate when it's data related. It's different if you're doing like regenerative images or something like that, where you put your imagination to it. But when you're collecting data, I think it starts to highlight where those hidden agendas are and kind of puts them more forward, and allows it to be a more visual understanding for people to see like where the issues in design are, why things are designed a specific way. I think architecture is very purposeful. I do agree that maybe in today's society, it's not, the goal isn't to create an aesthetically beautiful building, but the goal is to create some type of impact. And that impact is usually socially, because social is what drives everything. Placing a building here, placing a specific type, even when it comes to grocery stores, like they're placed in specific locations, shopping malls are designed in specific parts of the city. So underpopulating certain areas or blocking off certain areas from access, unfortunately, can be an intentional move that AI could potentially expose. With data, there's a lot of cyber cities. In Toronto, for example, there's a waterfront project that's a cyber city lab where it collects so much data of the people walking, what they're doing, how they're interacting, what types of interactions. And I think those types of statistics, once seen graphically, could maybe change or expose ways certain people think.
Yeah, no, this reminds me of a conversation we've had a while back with Andrew Stoddard on kind of surveillance and data collection. And that the challenge with surveillance and data collection is not that whether should we do it or not, but to what end. And what you're proposing here is that data collection can be helpful because it can't expose those biases and those kinds of discriminatory practices. Now, the skeptic in me can say also that people that are collecting data can be biased, and it's not a objective kind of exercise. Even data collection and data manipulation is very much affected by individuals that may have particular agendas. And so, I'll reserve, I guess, some of my skepticism on this. It's interesting just kind of talking to you as an architect where you see data, it's kind of almost like as a value-free kind of, but as a political scientist, I have a very hard time seeing data as a value-free one. Am I wrong in this? Or is there a lot more there?
No, I do agree. I do think that our careers definitely help us see different sides of things. And I think that's why it's really important with what you're doing, getting views from different parts of like industry sectors, because people see AI a lot differently. So to see how every sector sees it as a whole, maybe will give us a better picture of the potentials of it, of what it can really do, and understanding it a lot better. I do think like AI holds the potential to foster a good relationship and create inclusive spaces. But again, it's how it's utilized. AI is scripted at the end of the day, so it's like how those scripts are done. I do think if done properly, it can like collect data and create and enhance inclusivity in urban spaces, stimulating maybe new developments in diverse communities or in areas that are required of it. Is there a risk of AI bias in architecture? I think that is.
Let's talk about that. I mean, what is that risk? Can you tell us a bit more about the risk of AI bias in architecture and urban design more generally?
Absolutely. So I think when we're discussing public policies and funding, they're influenced a lot by AI-driven analysis. So if an AI model is discussing using a zoning or housing project is trained by data that favors a certain type of neighborhood or a major population area, I think that's going to influence and affect that type of data given. where to counteract this, it's like to use diverse data sets and establish more strict AI ethical standards in urban planning. And then maybe those policies can be transferred in other areas. But I think it needs to always be a transparent process where AI can more like equitably policy decisions, right? So I think that needs to be a transparent process, and then hopefully solving historical inequalities.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's usually certainly a lot right there in terms of addressing, because I think there's a certain sense of permanence, right, when it comes to urban planning and when it comes to, I mean, I mentioned the example of Robert Moses. This is a person who has left his imprint, obviously, on the New York highway system and urban planning, and we're still living today with those consequences. And legislation can change, but if there's a building right there on that road, or certain bridges are built with a certain clearance, then that obviously that's not going to change, or it takes a lot more effort to do so. And so I think that permanence is what gives a lot of people also the desire to control that process, right? And the question is, do you use AI then as a tool for enhancing, as you point out, the more equitable distribution, or is it for a more discriminatory one? Let's get a little bit more technical perhaps on AI, and how can, just in your practice and everything you've seen, how can AI enhance master planning efforts? I mean, we're talking about Robert Moses again. So how can AI enhance master planning efforts for large scale urban developments?
Yeah, so I think using AI to tackle some of those challenges that urban planning has is important. I think, like I mentioned before, smart city platforms are AI-driven platforms that they monitor and manage urban function within a city in real time. So traffic, energy consumption, public services, making cities maybe more responsive and efficient. I think that's very important. In Toronto, you'd think we're very developed, but it takes me an hour to get to work because we are on the TTC system for hours, when there should be an algorithm checking when trains are going to keep an efficient city versus having people just sit and wait and be stuck. I love my city, but the transit system, awful. I think predictive maintenance and infrastructure is a good one. AI algorithms can analyze patterns in infrastructure. So maybe like a wear and tear to predict maintenance needs for projects, reducing likelihood of disruptive failures, optimizing public spending. There's so many ways that it can be integrated into urban planning, but as well as architecture itself. I think AI is such a niche that it begins to affect the individual to a global scale. It affects every single sector. So I think that's what makes it really interesting. Data collection is very important because, again, there's that bias in data collection where AI is quite, again, we discussed bias, so I think that's not the right question to use. But there's sensors that could be embedded through the city. Officials can gather data, air quality, noise levels, foot traffic. Maybe this will help traffic, or maybe there's a integrated system that they can do that can begin to assess climate change, which would be great to begin to address equitable resource distribution, maybe identifying underserved areas in the city, help distribute resources like healthcare and education. Like I mentioned before, shopping malls, health centers, they're designed to be built in specific locations and neighborhoods that can also afford it. So the neighborhoods that lack those begin to unfortunately see the consequences. But if there's policies in urban planning that require specific neighborhoods that they have to have this type of system, maybe AI can also fight for people that aren't even in the room.
One of the debates that's been happening, I mean, I'm here in the United States now, and we had elections, obviously, in November of this year, 2024. And there's been a huge debate between the various political candidates, but also just generally in society about housing, right? Urban development. Both urban and rural, but most of the conversation is about the fact that there's so many homeless, right, encampments, especially in America's big cities. And so that has been one of the main concerns here, is like, how do you plan for this? Is there a role here for technology in terms of helping decision makers with regards to perhaps demographic trends and population growth? Is there something here that technologies can help in predicting these patterns and perhaps pointing the way where areas of growth could be and where we should be investing our resources?
That's a great question. I guess it kind of ties back to that question that you had about surveillance, other podcasts where you're discussing surveillance in the city. What are we okay with and what we're not okay with? AI can definitely help with predictive modeling for housing needs. But to do that, it needs to analyze demographic trends, income patterns, migration data. I think in Canada, I can't speak too much on the States, but for example, in Toronto, we have, unfortunately, we don't have enough housing for the amount of people that come into the city yearly. And that there you have to go somewhere, unfortunately. So that poses that question of, do we let people in or do we say, no, we don't have space? If we do let them in, where are they going to go? What's going to happen with all the space and the requirements and the urban space that's needed for people to live? But I think by using that type of data, it allows the urban planners to understand where the affordable housing will be greatest in coming years. For example, future planning of where those housing should be, to have a plan and anticipate the shift in population. So I think AI can definitely help with analyzing those demographic trends. It can help optimize land use in urban areas. There's a lot of underused and vacant lots in the city that could be definitely repurposed to affordable housing. AI can begin to analyze existing city infrastructure and identify these pockets, potentially propose sectors to be rezoned for this type of housing and to give more opportunity to people. But again, you run the risk of who's going to be funding this. There's a lot of other layers. And then when you look at who AI serves at the end of the day, it becomes a lot complicated question that we could spend a long time talking about.
I don't know. Yep. I was actually thinking as you were talking about underutilized spaces, I know that post-COVID, a lot of big rise buildings, have a lot of empty office space. And so I'd imagine that would probably be one area that you would think could be optimized, right, for residential areas in big cities where that is also the biggest concern.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that I agree with. You can propose. We can see if they'll do it. Again, it comes down to policies and government and what they choose to do with the space.
Yeah. Well, let me get a bit closer to home for you. I mean, again, you're an architect, as you pointed out. How have you found AI helping you in your streamlining design processes? How can that help architects, in a way, do their job better and more efficiently? And I don't know, what else?
Yeah, that's a fun question because, again, as we have seen in the conversation, we see AI differently. We see it like there's obviously the risks and the backside to it, but I see it as like a creative force for me. It's definitely been exciting to learn to understand a system differently. I've been passionately, I work a lot with AI, so I've begun to do regenerative imaging, video, scripting, which is really, really cool. They have the tools. I see it as a tool rather than something that can take something away from me. And I think that's the approach that we should be looking at because it could definitely shape how we work in the future. For myself, in a design process, for example, I've used AI building systems to just get my ideas out. So sometimes I have an image in my head, but I don't know what it looks like. I don't know how to get it out. So you add prompts for when we're talking about images, you add prompts and begins to collage an image that you have in your head that you can actually realize and then you can make concrete. And I think that's such an exciting tool to have, having something that can read your mind and give you different variations and inspirations to that idea, something that can expand us into thinking a lot differently. I think it's definitely helped in performance simulations where it's definitely helped the building energy systems, temperature regulations, lighting. So all of these plugins that allow me to create more exciting projects, realistic projects. The turnover is a lot faster as well. I get work done a lot faster, and why not be more efficient and get more jobs and enjoy what we're doing?
Do you fear it eventually getting better than you? I mean, there's a lot of talk about agentic or agent AI, kind of agentic AI. So, I mean, a lot of, at least in preparation for today's interview, a lot of talk about how AI, as you pointed out, is also transforming architectural design. And you mentioned it as an aid, as something that helps you, but there are fears it could displace jobs altogether, right? I mean, even in your answer, you said it allows you to do something much faster. That means that in architectural firm, instead of hiring 4 or 5 architects, we could hire 2 because it can do the work of 5 people with the aid of, by prompting AI-enabled kind of programs. And so is there a fear it could displace jobs, particularly for entry-level architects and designers? How do you think this will affect the future job market in the architecture engineering field?
I think it's important to look at the, I don't know how to phrase this, but this isn't the first time that something like this has impacted architecture. We were with pen and pencil and eraser, and there's photos of people who used to be in drafting rooms, and then they came to the age of technology where computers started and AutoCAD became. And there's a lot of those people who were drafting that didn't keep up with that demand and then didn't keep up with the AI. So I kind of see it as like a progressive future. I think maybe we might fall back a little bit. I do think it learns a lot faster than we do. I do think that as our younger generation is also getting older, they're going to grow up with it. So they'll think of new innovative ways to use it and to incorporate different systems together. I'm excited to see where the future goes. Is it going to take a job or two? Potentially. But that's unfortunately something that happens in every industry. I don't want to say if you're not keeping up with AI, that's not a good thing, but I would recommend everybody to keep up with AI, at least just be informed of what's going on with it. I do think it also creates new opportunities in the field of architecture. Like, we wouldn't have smart cities if we don't need AI. So those are things that need people to do. These are there's layers of architecture that need work to be done. When I say that it cuts my time in half, that's not saying that my work I would give that work to someone else. That's 10 hours that I would have to put in myself that I wouldn't give to someone else. So it cuts that 10 hours into 5, and it definitely helps me. So I think there's definitely like a positive way to see it. There's definitely a negative way to see it because there is that fear. But I think I see it as like a collaborative partner, not a replacement to architecture. So it's more of a productive way to think and use it as a tool and to enhance our creativity, because we are not tapped into 100% of our brain, right? I think it's 9%.
I'm not going to guess that.
Yeah, so it's like, why not have more things to like explore and expand our mind?
So at a brainstorming one, I mean, this is a conversation we have obviously in political science as well, especially in the classroom. How do you help students engage with AI in a way that they understand that it amplifies skills, it amplifies their ability to write better, but it should not replace their ability to write? There are some concerns about ethical considerations, obviously, with regards to AI implementation in workforce. And I think some of it has to do also with data protection. We mentioned surveillance already, we mentioned bias. So for the last question for the day, and we'll touch back on some of these kind of other themes that we've discussed so far. Listeners to our program will know that Diogenes is the patron saint of the podcast in a way. And what drives us is this question that we repeat, and this reminder that we always have at the end of our show. We'll have it again at the end of our show today. Staying human, right? That there is something. Diogenes is looking around the crowds in Athens, and he's looking in daylight, right? He's looking for human in each of us. And so one of the questions that keeps coming back when it comes to the interaction, right? In whatever profession we have or in whatever area of experiences that we have, it's the impact the technologies have on what it is to be human. Right? Not just will it replace jobs or not just the impact of biases and other things and the kind of social policy as we've discussed so far, but the impact on the quality of each of us as human beings. And so we're looking here, I imagine, from everything we've talked about, as a dual-edged sword, right? AI can make things more efficient, but it also can risk leaving people behind. But beyond job displacement, there's also a risk of becoming overly dependent on AI technology, especially in the field of design, right? Things are so much easier. So how do you see this dependence affecting the creative process? And could it diminish the role of human expertise?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question, especially when you start to begin thinking of the empathy aspect of design as well.
Oh, that's
I think AI, it affects the human side of design, but it's more about the functional tangible things. I think when we're thinking about AI, it's definitely a fantastic optimizing tool for production and calculation and information. But I don't think we're at the point now, or I don't know if we'll ever get to a point where it'll have an empathy or a cultural awareness. That I think the point of AI is it doesn't have that bias. And what makes us as humans is we have those thoughts that influence what we do and how we think and why we design the way that we design. So I do think that potentially it can come to a point where AI creates policies that we have to follow and regulate us as humans out of fairness, but it can begin to address issues that maybe people can't address because of those biases that we do have and those conflicting feelings, versus having a system that begins to populate certain things that we have to follow, whether we be in Canada or the States, maybe creating a more harmonized globe. There's a lot of positives that I think can be taken away from how AI can be utilized, especially in architecture, urban planning, and like a global design. But I think, do I worry that it might take the creative side away from people? No, I think it could potentially enhance it. It could expand how we see what's in our brain. It can expand different ideas. So I think it's an interesting dynamic that is it's a very thin line, but very exciting to explore.
Well, I'll mark you down as a techno optimist. It's good to do that. We don't run into those very often nowadays. I think the further ahead kind of AI goes in its capabilities, I think the more concerned people are. But it's good to hear kind of an optimistic take on this because clearly we have to work and we have to live with AI, and so we might as well just understand ways in which it can amplify who we are. Well, Iva, thank you so much for being with us today. This has been a very enlightening and I think elucidating kind of discussion for me at least, and I hope for our listeners as well. And of course, for our listeners, that's it for today's show. Join us again next time for another discussion at the intersection of law, society, and politics. Until then, stay human.